The thunder of steel rolled across the ruins of Berlin. In April 1945, the city was a carcass of shattered stone and smoke, its streets littered with the broken shells of buildings and the mangled frames of vehicles. The Soviet Red Army had encircled the capital, pouring fire and fury into its heart, and the Third Reich, once feared across Europe, was collapsing in blood and rubble. Yet in those final days, in the streets where the last German defenders fought, stories of desperation, sacrifice, and honor unfolded. Among them was the story of Hauptmann Karl Weiss, commander of a Tiger II tank, massive, iron beasts the Soviets called Stalinovy Grom, Steel Thunder. His crew was one of the last armored units left defending Berlin. Karl sat hunched in the turret, the stale air thick with oil and sweat. His hands traced the cold steel of the gun breech as though it were a relic. Around him, his crew waited in tense silence. Otto, his loyal gunner, sharp-eyed despite weeks without rest. Matthias, the loader, barely 20, trembling but determined. Erich, the driver, his face hollow with hunger and exhaustion. The radio crackled with the voice of their battalion commander, "Hold the Soviets at the Reichstag. Fight until the last shell." Karl's jaw tightened. They all knew what it meant. No relief, no retreat. Just delay the inevitable with steel and blood. "Men," Karl said, forcing his voice steady, "we're not fighting for Hitler. We're fighting for each other. For one last stand." They nodded. In the ruins, loyalty wasn't to ideology. It was to the man beside you. At dawn, the Soviet artillery began its thunderous chorus. The earth shook under the bombardment, dust and plaster raining from crumbling buildings. When the barrage ceased, the streets filled with the roar of T-34s and IS-2 heavy tanks pushing through Berlin's wreckage. Karl ordered the Tiger II into position behind a collapsed department store. The tank's engine growled, echoing in the hollow ruins, while its massive 88mm gun tracked the advancing enemy armor. 2 T-34s, left side. Otto shouted. "Steady," Karl whispered. "Wait. Fire." The cannon unleashed a blast like thunder itself. 1 T-34 erupted in flames, its turret flying skyward. The second tried to retreat, but Erich swung the Tiger's hull to block its path. Otto fired again, the shot ripping through the tank's armor like paper. Cheers erupted inside the steel beast. For a moment, they were gods of war, their Tiger II unstoppable, a predator among prey. But Karl knew better. Ammunition was scarce, fuel was low, and for every tank they destroyed, 10 more pushed forward. Hours bled together in a blur of fire and smoke. The Tiger rolled through Berlin's boulevards, engaging Soviet tanks in brutal duels. With each kill, Otto's hands grew steadier, his eyes more alive. Matthias loaded shells with frantic speed, his fear replaced by grim focus. At Friedrichstrasse, they ambushed a column of IS-2s. The Tiger's 88mm roared again and again, destroying 3 heavy tanks before Soviet infantry swarmed from the ruins with Molotov cocktails and anti-tank rifles. "Infantry left," Karl barked. Machine gun fire rattled from the Tiger's hull. Flames splashed across its armor but slid off harmlessly, this time. They pressed forward, crushing barricades under their treads, leaving burning wreckage in their wake. But their invincibility was an illusion. A shell struck the side of the Tiger, jarring them violently. Matthias screamed as shrapnel grazed his leg. The tank held, but Karl felt the truth in his bones. Steel could only delay fate. Still, they fought on. To stop would mean surrender, and none of them were ready to raise a white flag. By evening, Berlin was aflame. The city's sky glowed red, not from sunset but from the inferno devouring its heart. The Tiger II limped toward the Reichstag, its tread scarred, armor dented, and ammunition dwindling. Inside, the crew was silent. Exhaustion pressed on them like a weight, yet their bond had never been stronger. "Do you think anyone will remember us?" Matthias finally asked, his voice barely audible. Karl looked at the boy. No, the soldier, who had grown into a man in the space of a day. "They will. Not as heroes, but as men who stood when standing meant nothing." The words seemed to steady them. At Konigsplatz, the Tiger rumbled into position overlooking the Reichstag, now swarming with Soviet troops. Red flags already fluttered from shattered windows. The battle for the city's soul was nearly over. "Still," Karl ordered, Prepare to fire." The gun thundered again, sending Soviet armor into flames. The Tiger became a fortress, its cannons spitting defiance, its machine guns mowing down waves of infantry. Each shot echoed across the square, the last roars of a dying beast. Night fell, but the battle did not. Soviet tanks circled, firing relentlessly. The Tiger shuddered under the impact of shells, its armor cracking, its engine groaning. Smoke filled the interior. Otto's hands bled from burns. Matthias had run out of shells, resorting to passing the last grenades. Eric, coughing from fumes, kept the tank moving even as pieces of its track tore away. Karl's heart pounded. He knew this was the end. "Otto," he said, gripping his gunner's shoulder, "one last shot." Through the cracked periscope, Otto sighted an IS-2 advancing toward the Reichstag. He fired. The 88mm shell pierced its armor, igniting it in a fireball that lit the night sky. But before they could celebrate, 3 Soviet guns fired in unison. Explosions ripped through the Tiger. Metal screamed, flames engulfed the cabin, and the crew was thrown into chaos. Karl, his vision fading, pulled himself upright. Around him, his brothers were silent. He placed his hand on the steel wall of the Tiger, whispering, "You were our shield, our thunder." As the flames consumed them, the Tiger gave its final roar, steel thunder fading into the night. When dawn came, the Reichstag flew the red flag. Berlin had fallen. Among the ruins of Konigsplatz lay the burnt husk of a Tiger II, smoke still curling from its carcass. Soviet soldiers passed it cautiously, aware of the beast it once was. Inside, the remains of Karl and his crew sat where they had fought, together, to the very end. A Soviet officer, hardened by years of war, paused before the wreck. He saluted, a gesture of respect for enemies who had fought with courage, even in a lost cause. For in war, honor is not measured by victory, but by the will to stand when all else crumbles. The Tiger II became a silent monument to the last defenders of Berlin, a story carried by whispers among soldiers on both sides. They were not remembered as Nazis, nor as heroes, but as men who fought with steel hearts in the city's final storm. And as the fires of Berlin cooled, the echoes of their defiance remained, steel thunder rolling forever in memory.